So today we're going to talk about rules for addition and subtraction. And we're going to focus mostly on addition, but we're going to get some subtraction in there as well. And these rules that we're going to be talking about are for all real numbers. So remember, this means real numbers. So rules for addition for all real numbers, A and B. So I'm just using A and B as a placeholder for any real number. So the first rule says if A and B are both positive, so they're both positive numbers, then A plus B is the absolute value of A plus the absolute value of B. Now remember, absolute value, no matter what you put in, you're going to get positive. So when both A and B are positive, when you add them, it's like adding their absolute values. That's also like adding their distance from 0. Something to just kind of throw around in your head. But if A and B are both positive, A plus B equals the absolute value of A plus the absolute value of B. Well, what about when A and B are both negative? What does A plus B look like if they are both negative? Well, it looks like the opposite of the sum of their absolute values. So I'm going to give you an example here. If I have negative 2 plus negative 3, that's the same as negative 2 plus 3, which is negative 5. So hopefully you see that when I have two numbers that are negative, negative 2 plus negative 3, I get negative 5. So it's the opposite of their sum. Alright, well, how about this situation? If A is positive and B is negative, so A greater than 0 means A is positive, B less than 0 means B is negative. So if A is positive, B is negative, and the absolute value of A is greater than the absolute value of B. So I'm going to give you an example so that you can kind of see what we're talking about. If A is 5 and B is negative 2, the absolute value of 5 is greater than the absolute value of negative 2, because 5 is greater than 2. So if I have this situation, what does A plus B look like? Well, it looks like the absolute value of A minus the absolute value of B. So coming back to my 5 and negative 2, 5 plus negative 2 equals the absolute value of 5 minus the absolute value of 2, or negative 2, and that gives me 5 minus 2, which is 3. And 5 minus 2 is 3. Alright. What if I have this situation? Again, A is positive and B is negative, but now the absolute value of B is greater than the absolute value of A. So now let's say B is negative 6 and A is 2. So the absolute value of negative 6 is greater than the absolute value of 2. So in this instance, what does A plus B look like? Well, it's going to be opposite or negative, and it's going to be the absolute value of B minus the absolute value of A. So let's go ahead and do 2 plus negative 6. And that's going to be the opposite, or minus, the absolute value of negative 6 minus the absolute value of 2, which is 6 minus 2. And so that gives me negative 4. So let's pause for just 1 second and notice that whichever one has the larger absolute value, that's the sign that your result has. So when A was positive and the absolute value of A was bigger than the absolute value of B, our result was positive. Now that the absolute value of B is greater than the absolute value of A, our result is negative. Alright, so what if A and B are opposites? Well, remember what opposites are. And so A plus B, well, if A is 2 and b is the opposite of 2, b would be negative 2. So a plus b equals 0. So when we add opposites, the answer is 0. And that was actually the property of opposites. But now we can say that even if a and b are different variables, but they're opposites, they're gonna add up to be 0. So now we want to look at the rules for subtraction for all real numbers a and b. So if I have a minus b, I call this the difference of a and b. So what is the rule then to find the difference of a minus b? Well, a minus b, or the difference of a and b, is a plus negative b. Well, wow, that seems earth-shattering, but remember, we just talked about when a is positive and b is negative, what the rule for addition is. So the rule for subtraction points back to the rules for addition. And remember, there were two: either the absolute value of a is greater than the absolute value of b, or the absolute value of b is greater than the absolute value of a. So you want to refer to your notes when you're doing subtraction, because you want to think of it like addition, adding the opposite. Okay, what if I want to simplify this? Negative 9 plus negative 8 plus 10 plus 7. So it's all addition. And look at here. I have 2 negatives, and then over here I have 2 positives. So this is like the opposite of 9 plus 8 plus, and then I'm going to go ahead and just put 17. Well, 9 plus 8 is 17, so this is negative 17 plus 17, and these are opposites. So that simplifies down to 0, which is pretty handy. What if I want to simplify this? Negative y minus negative y plus 4. Well, first things first, let's deal with this subtraction. So this is negative y plus the opposite of negative y plus 4, all in brackets. So you see what I did there? Took the opposite and added it. So now I'm going to distribute this negative sign right there. So I get negative y plus, well, that becomes y, and that becomes negative 4. So I have negative y plus y minus 4, which is just negative 4. What if I want the opposite of the difference between y and 7? So that's the opposite of the difference. Well, remember that we learned that the opposites, let's see, which one was that? The opposite of a sum. So if we have negative out there, y minus 7 is really y plus negative 7. And now we have a sum, and the opposite of a sum is really the opposite of the first plus the opposite of the second. So opposite of a sum, we learned that in the last video. So that's negative y plus negative 7, which is negative y plus 7. So negative y plus 7. Alright, so let's go do the check-in and see how well you did.